Netflix just swallowed Warner Brothers. Meta is being sued after teen sextortion suicides. Uber's free trial may be illegal, and the Epstein files are back in the headlines again. This is Exhibit A List, and the algorithm is absolutely the defendant this week. Welcome back to Exhibit A List, the podcast where pop culture gets cross examined. We break down the lawsuits, contracts, and power plays behind the headlines. I'm Jasmine Wegg. I'm a New York attorney, and I spend my days litigating, negotiating, and reading filings so you don't have to, and then translating it all into normal human language. If you're into pop culture, tech, business, or just love knowing what's actually going on behind the scenes, you're in the right place. Quick housekeeping before we get into it. Please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Rate the podcast, send the episode to a friend, share it with that friend who always asks, wait, can they actually do that? Don't forget to follow me on social media. I'm at Jasmine Wegg ESQ on Instagram, Jazz the Lawyer at TikTok, and Exhibit A List Pod on Instagram. I post quick legal breakdowns, hot takes, and clips from the show. All right, this episode is packed. Lawsuits, settlements, redemption arcs, all our favorite things, and some very strong, the call is coming from inside the platform energy. So let's get into it. House Democrats on the Oversight Committee just released new, never before seen photos from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. And the names on the photos are familiar. We got Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, Steve Bannon, Woody Allen. Now, it's important to note that none of the photos show illegal activity, no crimes, and there's no actual smoking gun in them, but they do show Epstein's property, his guests, and some very on brand Epstein decor choices. But the timing of all this isn't what's important. This is all happening because the Justice Department is up against a legal deadline. Under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a law Congress passed and Trump himself signed, the DOJ is supposed to release all remaining Epstein files by December 19th. And guess what? It's December 21st already. Now, the first batch of photos is just a fraction of what exists. There's supposed to be 95,000 images that Epstein's estate has already turned over to the committee. The law also includes an escape hatch. The DOJ can delay releasing materials if they claim that disclosure would interfere with an ongoing investigation or implicate third-party privacy concerns. So right now, the DOJ has not publicly invoked that exception. But do we think that they will? Because that seems like a very good catch-all. On top of that, federal judges in New York have ordered the release of additional records tied to Epstein's 2019 sex trafficking case and his convicted accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. So legally, politically, and culturally, there's a countdown happening all at once. Play here, we have the public's very justified desire to know who associated with Epstein and how closely. So to me, the legal question is not who has ever met Epstein, because we know it's basically a lot of powerful people. But the question remains, will the records show knowledge of or participation in criminal conduct? Photos alone rarely can prove that, but the emails, calendars, travel logs, witness statements, those are going to be heavy on the evidence side. And that's why the documents behind the images matter more than the images themselves. But let's pivot from this DC chaos to the Bravoverse, because this one is quite fascinating. NeNe Leakes, who is an icon in the Real Housewives of Atlanta franchise, is reportedly in talks to return to Bravo. The same Bravo that she sued. Only a queen can sue your boss and then come back to your job. If you forgot, NeNe Leakes filed a lawsuit and she accused Bravo and Andy Cohen, Bravo's crowning king, of fostering a racially discriminatory work environment and retaliating against her after she spoke up. Guys, let's not forget, this is the reckoning of reality TV. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court, so there were no public filings. Your girl wishes there were, but I do respect a settlement. No trial either, but it was resolved. And so now there's reports that NeNe and the network are exploring some kind of return. Because let's be real, regardless of what she claims in court, The network wants what's best for their network, which is what's best for their bottom line, to make moolah, and NeNe brings the dollars because she just brings the chaos to TV. We love to see her. So they're talking about whether it's a return to the Real Housewives of Atlanta or some other Bravo project. You know, when you see a discrimination case quietly settle and then you see that the plaintiff potentially walks back into the same ecosystem, it tells you a few things. One, the settlement almost always means control over the narrative was more valuable than a public trial for both sides. Two, it does not mean that her claims were fake or frivolous. It means that the risk calculus changed. And three, in entertainment, money, ratings, and nostalgia have a way of smoothing over things that would never fly in a normal workplace. So now let's go from Bravo court to actual criminal court, but in a really positive direction. Because country star Jelly Roll has officially been pardoned for his past convictions. It's amazing, Jelly Roll. We're so happy for you. He's been very open about his teenage and early adult crimes. He spent time in jail. He's talked about his sobriety. He's made music about prison. He's even had a lot of videos come out where he's playing his music for inmates currently in prison. And it's actually really beautiful to see how it touches them. And his music, he said, has changed his life. This pardon clears certain felony convictions from his record. That matters more than people realize. A pardon doesn't say that it never happens, but it's saying that the state is choosing to forgive this and to remove the legal disabilities that come with it. So that will affect travel and visas, touring internationally, certain business deals, and his long-term credibility. In a culture that's obsessed with redemption arcs, this is the legal stamp that matches the public story that Jelly Roll has been consistently telling for years. But now we need to talk about a lawsuit that's genuinely heartbreaking. Two families are suing Meta after their teenage sons died by suicide following sextortion schemes carried out on Instagram. If you don't know about sextortion, it is a disturbing trend that's happening particularly to vulnerable teenage boys, in which these predators will message on various apps, whether it's on social media apps or direct text to them, and they pose as attractive women, attractive girls that look their age, and they get them to either actual send real nudes of themselves or inappropriate photos of themselves to these accounts, or they will pretend that they've sent those pictures to them, and then they'll use that to try and get money from them. And they increasingly ask for more and more money, and they'll threaten to send these photos everywhere to all their friends, out to their school, to publicly humiliate them. And they threaten the kids, if you don't have the money, we're releasing them. And it sadly can result in suicide. According to these complaints against Meta, predators pose as young women on the app, so like on Instagram, build trust with the boys, convince them to send explicit images, and then threaten to share those images unless the teens paid money or sent more content. Specifically, the lawsuit alleges that Meta knew that Instagram was being used as a hunting ground for predators, had internal data showing that risk, failed to implement reasonable safeguards in time, and one internal audit cited a reporting that says that Instagram's accounts you may follow tool recommended 1.4 million potentially suspect accounts to minors in a single day. That is not okay. That's not user error. That is system design. Meta will, of course, lean heavily on Section 230, which shields platforms from liability for user-generated content. But the families are being very strategic here. They're not saying you're responsible for what users posted. They're saying you designed an algorithm that predictably exposed minors to danger and you ignored known risks. That's a product liability and negligence argument, not just a content one, which is an interesting angle. Courts are increasingly willing to look at design choices, not just content moderation. And this case is part of a broader shift where algorithms themselves are becoming the defendants. Now we got to go from tech platforms to jury rooms. Harvey Weinstein's lawyer is once again trying to undo his conviction. This time, the argument centers on affidavits from jurors in his most recent New York case. Two jurors now claim that they were bullied, pressured, and intimidated into voting guilty. They describe a hostile jury room environment and say that they regret their verdict. The defense is arguing that the pressure undermined the voluntariness of the verdict. Combined with the alleged issues involving the foreperson for the jury, Weinstein's right to a fair trial was violated, according to his attorneys. But the truth is, courts hate cracking open jury deliberations. There are very narrow exceptions, like explicit racial animus. But just saying I felt pressured is almost never going to get you a new trial. That bar is extremely high. The real question is this now juror remorse after the fact, or was there actual coercion? Weinstein's team is throwing everything at the wall because even losing buys time and leverage. But historically, these arguments rarely succeed. Now, guys, let's talk about what might be the biggest entertainment deal of the decade. Netflix has reportedly agreed to buy Warner Brothers films and streaming divisions, including HBO and Max, in a roughly $72 billion deal. If this goes through, Netflix doesn't just become the biggest streamer. It becomes the studio, the distributor, the library, and the pipeline. The reported plan is to keep theatrical releases for major Warner films while folding HBO's prestige catalog into Netflix's platform. Translation: all roads lead to Netflix. But there is an antitrust angle that regulators are going to look at. Market share, and they're looking at market share in streaming subscriptions, who is controlling film and TV licensing, and whether competitors can realistically survive. The tricky part is that antitrust law is still catching up with these streaming economies. It's not just about who sells the most, it's about who controls all the attention, the libraries, the must-watch IP. If approved largely as is, this deal could reshape Hollywood in a way we've never seen. Fewer buyers, fewer options for creators, and more power concentrated into one platform. Now, we know concentrating power never seems like a good thing. And moving on, we've got one more lawsuit that we got to look at. This lawsuit hits very close to home. The FTC and 21 states and DC have now filed an amended complaint against Uber over its Uber One subscription program. Regulators say that Uber marketed free trials with promises of zero delivery fees and savings. Your girl has been a victim. I get offered that every time I log on. However, enrolled users without clear consent. So basically, you're signing up for that little trial and you're getting enrolled in an annual membership. They're charging people before the trial ends, and they make canceling, of course, unnecessarily complicated. Some users report clicking through 10 or more screens just to cancel. This case has been part of a broader crackdown on dark patterns, which are design choices that are meant to manipulate users into subscriptions or make it disproportionately hard to leave. We're talking about pre-checked boxes, buried terms, endless "are you sure" loops. I remember I was canceling Thrive one time and I had to go through 50 "are you sures" to the point where I eventually just said, let me keep it another year. The message from regulators, though, is simple. If your product team is celebrating how few people cancel, the FTC is going to ask whether you tricked them into staying. That's no longer just a UX issue. It's a legal one. So here's where we land this week. We've got Epstein records putting pressure on DOJ transparency. We got NeNe Leakes proving that lawsuits and comebacks are not mutually exclusive. Jelly Roll is getting legal redemption to match his public one. Meta is facing devastated claims over teen safety and algorithm design. Harvey Weinstein's testing the limits of jury secrecy. Netflix is potentially reshaping Hollywood forever. And Uber's learning that free doesn't mean consequence free. Well, guys, if you enjoyed this episode, it helps the show more than you realize if you follow, rate, subscribe, leave a quick review, especially on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Share this episode with a friend who loves pop culture but secretly wants to know how the law actually works, or that friend that always told you that they were going to be a lawyer but blah, 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 blah. Let them shine by listening to this podcast and knowing all the legal tea. And if you want daily legal tea, don't forget to follow me on TikTok at Jazz the Lawyer and Instagram at JasmineWegESQ. Thank you for listening. Stay curious. I'm Jasmine Weg, and this has been Exhibit A List. I'll see you next time.